On this week's episode of Inside Outside Innovation, Robyn and I talk about why startups fail, the best workplaces for innovators, and the digital detox on college campuses. Let's get started. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast to help innovation leaders navigate what's next. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat into what it takes to grow and thrive in a world of hyper uncertainty and accelerating change. Join me, Brian Ardinger, and Mile Zero's Robyn Bolton as we discuss the latest tools, tactics, and trends for creating innovations with impact. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and with me I have our co-host, Robyn Bolton.
Thank you. Glad to be here as always.
We are excited to continue on giving our audience the best insights into what we're seeing.
Let's get to it.
The first article is an article I read in Wildfire Labs called Why Startups Fail, Patterns from $2 billion in Startup Failures. In the article, it talks about some of the research that shows that failure patterns are more consistent than success patterns or success formulas, which makes sense. There's a lot more ways to fail and probably a lot more consistent ways to fail than there are ways to win. The article talks about how can startups be more focused on understanding where failure points are, and then what can you do about it. They had some research in there. CB Insights took a look at startup failures and revealed that 42% failed due to no market need, 29% ran out of cash, and 23% had team issues. So I think everybody can relate to those particular common problems, and not only in the startup realm, but also in the corporate innovation realms. With that, what was your first take on the article?
My first take was 42% failing because there's no market. It was come on, step one is finding a problem that's worth solving. It should absolutely not be that high, but also knowing that people tend to fall in love with ideas and not problems, kind of not surprised.
It'd be interesting to see what that number is at the very beginning, because it actually might be higher than 42%, because I think a lot of times we don't hear about the initial idea. Initial idea is probably closer to 90%, and that's not right.
Yes.
When you first get off the ground, and it's 42% by the first or second pivot. Yes, I think that is a common issue. There's so many reasons why I've seen it manifest itself from the standpoint of again, you get somebody who's interested in a particular topic, or they see something that bothers them and they start going off in a particular solution and don't necessarily realize that may be a problem, but it may be problem number 355 on the list of problems to solve. And therefore you don't get market traction or enough immediate application to trying to solve that particular problem. Doing things like customer discovery and making that a primary part of the first idea innovation efforts is probably a way to help mitigate that particular pitfall.
I always say it's the hill I will die on. Start with talking to your customers or your desired customers and actually listen. Ask them open-ended questions and listen, because I think we also all fall back on do you like this idea? And no one's going to call the baby ugly. They know you spent time on it, so you have to ask open-ended questions. The other thing, and I've seen this come up more and more in conversations that I'm having with other folks in the innovation space, is this realization that a lot of the tools that we use, especially in corporate innovation, business model, Canvas, leading startup, things like that, are actually best used to develop an idea once you already know that there's a problem. And in the rush that both entrepreneurs and corporate innovators have of oh my gosh, we need to do something, get something out in the market. And we have all these tools that are proven, that are great for getting things out into the market. We naturally gravitate to the canvases and to the frameworks that are this is how you go do stuff.
You can use those canvases in a way, even at the earliest stages, but you have to look at it from the standpoint of this is our best guess day one. And these are going to change. And as long as you're open to changing it, the reason why I do like those particular tool sets is that it is a little bit easier to change than back in the day when you had to write a 100-page business plan and 65 Excel sheets to justify it. At least it's much easier to take a look at a business model and say, okay, I'm going to take that sticky note off because I talked to a customer and in fact, idea wasn't exactly where it needs to be. So we need to change the sticky note out and try something else or change the model in some way. But I think a lot of people, again, they go through the first canvas or the first iteration and say, okay, this is the plan, we're going to execute the plan, versus saying, this is a snapshot in time and our assumptions in time. How can we move this particular thing forward and make sure that the canvas maintains reality with what's going on in the marketplace?
Yeah. And I think the key is Post-it notes on the canvas. Don't write on the canvas.
Right.
Because then it feels permanent. Post-it notes.
The other thing in this particular article, they talk about solution sets or things, and I encourage people to go take a look at Wildfire Labs. Talk about a clever way to think about the major ways and pitfalls that folks go through. It's fail, fit, acquisition economics, internal alignment, and liquidity planning. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about each of those particular ways to checklist, I guess, to look at on a particular idea. So obviously fit, we just talked a little bit about it, but how do you evaluate the solution? Is it urgent customer need or is it a minor inconvenience, and trying to understand the relativity and the fit of the problem? But not only that, but I think fit to the people trying to solve that problem. And you've probably seen this in the corporate realm as well. A lot of companies go shooting off towards the shiny object, whether or not it's a fit for their company or they're good at it or whatever.
So many companies, when they start their innovation journey, so to speak, they're really hesitant to put any sort of constraints on the work. They're like, blue sky, do anything, white space. And the reality is there's always constraints. And those are actually really helpful. Thinking about fit as, is this a fit with our capabilities? If it's not, are we willing to go acquire or find those capabilities? And if we're not, okay, then we got to stick with our capabilities. Is it a fit with where we have a right to play and win in the market? And again, if the answer is no, that's okay. Maybe that becomes a licensing opportunity or something like that. But yeah, I love the addition of thinking about, especially in corporate, is this a fit for us as the corporation, as much as is this a fit for the market?
When I'm talking to corporates, a lot of times they'll tell me what their particular problems they're going after, and or they'll frame the problems that they're talking about as, hey, we need this because we need more revenue. That's a problem for you as the company,
Yes.
as the corporate. But is that a problem for the end customer that you're trying to solve? And so trying to understand, again, fit, I think it's just a lot of times a mindset. You're always in that realm of, okay, bigger, better, growing revenue in that. And so you look at it from the lens of the corporate versus flipping it and looking at it from the side of the marketplace.
Yeah, you have to look at both sides. Otherwise, it's going to be a throwback. But it's kind of like the South Park episode with the underwear gnomes, where the gnomes
Yes.
are collecting underwear is step one. Step three is profit. And they're like, what's step two? It's, we're innovating for revenue. Great. What's step two? Like, who needs anything? Yeah.
Exactly. The second letter in the fail was acquisition economics. And this is looking at how do you acquire customers and calculate how much does it cost to get a new person into the funnel and onboarded and that. And I think this is where corporates can have a significant advantage because they typically have some customers. They have methodologies and models and that for how do you acquire customers. They probably have a little bit better way to measure it a lot of times versus a brand new marketplace. But acquisition economics is something crucial. If you can't make enough money on who you're selling it to, and if it costs too much money to get somebody to actually try or use your product, you're in line for that failure cloud there.
Certainly, companies, corporates, they have their tried and true models on what's required for acquisition, spending, what a media plan needs to look like, et cetera. That's both good and bad, right? They have their playbook, which they know, but maybe the innovation, the idea needs something different. With startups, they do need to think about the acquisition costs. They can probably be a little bit more creative, but there's probably also a little, this idea is so amazing. If we build it, they will come. So it's a good reminder, I think, for both sides to say, okay, you have to think about acquisition cost. And if you've done this before, make sure you're approaching acquisition in the best possible way.
And like where are you getting funding from and things along those lines. I mean, you look at there are some startups that were able to deploy a methodology that most people can't. Like, think back to Uber, where they had so much venture capital, they could acquire customers a lot of different ways, just throw money at the problem. And then eventually when they went public, they had to figure out, okay, how do you right size this? And actually we're burning a lot of cash trying to acquire these particular customers. So really understanding where you are in that cycle, how much does it cost, and will that continue to be the case moving forward? Third letter is I, internal alignment. And obviously startups, small teams, et cetera, that's one of the biggest failure points is founder disagreements contribute to about 13% of startup failures, according to the research. I've actually seen other statistics where it's actually higher than that at X. Sometimes it's number one in startup. But when it comes to the corporate side, internal alignment, what are your thoughts on that?
It's also a key cause of failure for corporate innovation as well. And it's often because, you have the business owner, you have the CFO, you have the CO, and everyone is viewing things through their own lens, appropriately enough, and with their own priorities in mind. And a lot of times early on, innovation's exciting. Let's go innovate. Let's all use the word, but we're all probably thinking something different, and we probably all have different benchmarks for what it needs to do or look like or generate. And it's not really until things start getting real, i.e., we have to start making big investments, that senior decision makers dig in. And that's when you find out that there's misalignment.
Yes. I think the other thing is just team culture. Obviously, with existing teams or existing corporate environments, sometimes you can pick those players. Sometimes you have an existing culture that has to be worked at, whereas a startup, you have some advantages from the standpoint you can pick the team from the get-go, but that also is challenging to do. Different size, but definitely a problem point and a pitfall to avoid, whether you're building a startup or building a corporate innovation exercise. And then the final one was liquidity planning. You've got to be able to make money and drive revenue and don't burn all your revenue along the way, where obviously a corporate stands out from that perspective. They should have a little bit more access to that capital if they're willing to particularly invest in that. I think where the challenge is oftentimes is a lot of corporates don't allow enough time or don't want to put as much capital as it really takes to get a brand new idea off the ground. And so that's some of the challenges on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, especially if the idea is being developed in, a corporate innovation lab or,
Right.
an innovation space that's separate, it's not liquidity, but you have to find a home for the innovation somewhere where there is liquidity. And that is often what kills so many corporate innovation, especially pilots that are up and revenue generating. And now it's time to scale, but there's no home for them in a business unit P&L. That's a problem.
Yeah, we talk about the baby bird problem. You incubate something and it's this little bird outside the nest. And if you want to get it back into the nest, it's very hard a lot of times
Yeah.
because, again, they're designed to execute on the existing business model, not the new one that you've just come and changed their way of thinking.
And then, oh, by the way, this is going to be cash flow negative for a couple of years, but don't worry about that.
The second one I wanted to bring out, you sent this over to me. Fast Company has just released their 100 best workplaces for innovators. So this is a list that Fast Company's come up with to take a look at the best workplaces for innovators. And oftentimes I don't think we talk about that, like what makes a good workplace for innovation and what are some of the things that people look for. And so I'll start off with the methodology that they used is they said to earn the best workplaces for innovators recognition, all the winners had to complete an application that addressed the questions looking at projects, investment, company-wide programs, and workplace culture. And then their editors evaluated the application and conduct additional research and then came up with their top almost 100 companies that are on this particular list. But it was fascinating. I love your take on what you saw in the list and some of the things that stood out to you.
Speaking of alignment, I don't feel like there was a lot of alignment amongst the editors as they reviewed the applications as to, how to weight each of the areas, because just looking at the top three, I mean, you have Motorola as number one, the Glow companies, which is an education company, at number two, and then VML, which is an advertising and marketing agency, at number three. And those are such vastly different companies
Exactly.
that I am certain are vastly different workplaces from each other for innovators. So kind of saying, hey, this is the top 100 is, wait, that assumes that all innovators are the same and like doing the same kinds of innovation and are capable of it. I have questions about the top 100. I'll say that.
It was interesting to see the breadth and depth of the types of companies that submitted and were put on the list. And unfortunately, you couldn't read into each company's given a paragraph of the things that they included in their application, but it was difficult to really unpeel what that meant. So a company like VML, based in Kansas City, just down the road, was more of an advertising agency, think tank for different companies. Motorola has been around forever, and they're touting their AI-driven public safety initiatives that were very customer-focused or customer-centric. You've got a company like Mattel, and they were touting their internal innovation accelerator. A company like Zebra was focusing on the fact that they had dedicated 10% R&D budget, but they were really focused on patent creation and patent applications. And then you have things like SoundCloud in the entertainment space, where their nugget in the article was talking about their Clouders First program that recognized and nurtured nonlinear career paths. They were looking at what makes a good workplace for innovators at SoundCloud was like how do we create an environment for nonlinear ways to move around and contribute to the company. So I found it very interesting.
I think further proof that we tend to treat innovation in all of its forms as a word is like chocolate, and it's just we spread it all over everything as if everything is equally good with chocolate, which many things are, but some things are not.
Bacon, it's always bacon.
It's always bacon, always bacon. And so the same thing here, Motorola's, as you mentioned, high up there because of patents. Okay, I'm an innovator. I don't get particularly jazzed about patents. I'm in no way qualified to work on patents. Motorola would actually not be a great place for me. So, I think there's that. I think there's also, it comes back to the definition of innovation of it's not just doing new stuff, it's about having impact and
Mhm.
creating value. All of these innovation efforts, whether they're patents, whether they're nonlinear career paths, what value are they creating? That has to come into the equation.
I encourage everybody to take a look at the list. If nothing else, it just gives a good insight into, there's obviously a lot of AI assistants. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in there. There's Johnson and Johnson talking about their $17 billion in R&D, talking about how they've funded multiple internal incubators and innovation hubs. But I find it fascinating. I encourage people to take a look at it to see the variety of
Mhm.
both inside and outside innovation that's happening and how that's applying to the workforce there. Our third article, the title is Meet the Students Who Don't Use Laptops. It's an article from Days. It's back in the UK, I believe, was it published. I thought this was a nice follow-up to our episode talking about writing a few weeks ago. The article talks and has interviewed a number of students focused on this idea of like, how are people using new technologies like AI and that. And the results of the conversations were a vast majority of students are relying on laptops while there's a growing small contingent of folks that have become the new Luddite in the world and skewing technology for old ways to re-engage their brain, and that we seem to be seeing this more and more, at least in the popular press.
Absolutely. And it's funny, as much as in our past episode, we need to write more. Writing is critical to thinking. In this article, there are photos of students showing their handwritten essays. And I think my right hand immediately cramped up just seeing pages and pages of handwriting. So I love it. I love that there is a reaction to the all tech all the time, to going back and being a Luddite. I think, as usual, the ideal spot is somewhere in between, and there's a place for handwriting and there's a place for technology. But the ricochet, the kind of pendulum swinging, is a sign that we'll eventually find our way into everyone's personal kind of ideal spot.
And the challenge is digital detox sounds great on paper, but it's very hard to make that happen and continue to thrive and excel in a world that's continually focused on technology and providing tools that make you stronger, faster, better. But there is a growing body of research that's saying, hey, it's not a panacea as well, where everything from your higher cognitive thought processes can change based on the tools that you use and how you use them.
And it's funny because even, this semester I'm teaching at a Boston area university, and everything is online. Even the course pack for my students is a digital one. It's not even printed out. Kind of on that other hand, I'm like, oh man, if I have any Luddites in my class, like I am the problem now. It's tough. Like you said, it's tough to get away from the technology and fully digitally detox, just because technology and digital is just a huge part of our lives and more part of our institutions. But I think we're starting to figure out the in between.
If folks want to send us articles to take a look at in future episodes, please do send that over to us. The last section that we try to have every week is something we're calling Tactics to Try. Robyn, you have anything you want to start with?
So I have been experimenting this week, not just with AI, with LLMs. I always use, Claude and ChatGPT, but in building my own AI agents. So I've been, not an endorsement, shout out, I've just been using Lindy AI. It's the first one I came across. It is both fun and challenging, and I can definitely see how there will come a day where there could be very high revenue companies with one or two people,
Mhm.
because you just have an army of agents working. So I encourage folks, if you haven't started playing around with creating your own AI agents, give it a shot. It's very, very interesting and could actually make your life a little bit easier.
The tactics I want to talk about, there's a couple things going on in our local ecosystem that I thought I'd shout out. one thing I've been thinking about this week is the power of being around other innovators and explorers and creatives, and how important that is to include in your repertoire. A couple of things that are coming out that I'll talk about from our local ecosystem, but this is happening in every city around the world right now. These things that allow you to play or try or build things, hackathons, things like that. But this weekend is the Jumpstart Challenge here in Lincoln, Nebraska. This is something that started maybe 8 or 10 years ago, where the Chamber of Commerce found a local company and had that local company present one of the industry problems that they were seeing. And then a group of entrepreneurs heard the challenges, formed teams, and had a certain amount of time to kind of test or try or build some particular solutions, and then pitch that back to the company. And the winner would have a chance to actually work with that corporate to test it, to build it out, et cetera. And, we did this 10 years ago when we first started as a way to engage the startup entrepreneurship community around here. And it actually ended up creating a couple of different companies over the years. A company like Noble that started with the Brian Healthcare Challenge and solved that particular problem that they had thrown out from an industry standard, and then got to work with them as a kind of a beta client, and then eventually got into an accelerator in motion, got it invested in, and eventually built that company, and then last year sold and was acquired by NRC, which is a local company here as well. So we've seen it work in practice from, how do you take a nugget of an idea that somebody in the ecosystem saying, hey, this is a problem in our industry, can somebody else help us figure this out? And so not only is it a way to play in that particular space, but it also brings people together. And even if nothing comes from the particular challenge or whatever, being around other creative folks, other builders, other folks that are willing to try and experiment and do things, that goes a long way to helping build an ecosystem. And I encourage folks, if you feel like you're in your own cubicle and don't know how to do this, there's plenty of stuff out in different ecosystems that are happening that allow you to spread your wings and be a part of it. So I encourage people to do that. And the Jumpstart Challenge is one thing that's happening. Teams that form themselves, they'll have a chance to build between Saturday and then the beginning of Silicon Prairie Startup Week, where they'll have a chance to showcase what they're doing. And so, I just thought it was an interesting topic to throw out there and encourage people to get out there and be a part of the ecosystem, learn what it takes in real life to roll up your sleeves and be an innovator.
Go be with other humans. It's so
Exactly.
important.
That is another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Thanks for coming out. We'll look forward to seeing you next time around.
See ya.
That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Today's episode was produced and engineered by Susan Stiebel. If you want to learn more about our teams, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io, or if you want to connect with Robyn Bolton, go to milezero.io. And until next time, go out and innovate.